Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Niger Innis Presents The Trump Revolution, a part of the TvAbraham network. Well, folks, we are in extraordinary times. We know just yesterday that the cabinet of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his defense cabinet, which includes some very hard right security hawks, actually accepted the peace proposal proposed by President Trump. It's a 21-point plan, and they have adopted and accepted at least the first phase of the peace proposal. We know that the Palestinian people, through the remnants of the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and the pseudo terrorist organization Hamas, and actually give them a great deal of leverage by and credit by calling them pseudo. They're a lot more than a pseudo terrorist organization, but somewhat of a political entity as well, as they have signed on and been part of the negotiations as well in this first phase of the Trump plan. And we know that President Trump will be going to Egypt this in the next few days to join the various players, from the Turks to the Egyptians to Qatar, and of course Israel and the Palestinian representation as well, which will all be over there to formally kick off the first phase of this 21 piece plan, and to celebrate this historic moment for the Middle East. Well, I can't think of a better person to have on to discuss these matters and others in the Middle East than Jean-Marc Oppenheim, who teaches history and culture and politics of the Middle East and Islam at Columbia University. You might say that the professor is a product of Columbia University, in that I believe I got it right, that you got your undergraduate degree from Columbia as well as your PhD from Columbia as well, and now you teach there as well as New York University. Well, it is a pleasure to have you on, Professor Oppenheim. Let me let me start with this really broad question, which is, with the developments in the Middle East, if this first phase is successful, are we on the brink of a golden age for the state of Israel and the larger Middle East as well? And what I mean by that is economically, security wise, are we on the brink of the Abraham Accords really blossoming across the Middle East?
Niger, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in your broadcast. I'm delighted to share with you and your audience my perspective on the issues that your question has just raised. First of all, let me make a slight correction to this wonderful introduction you gave me. First, I'm retired. I no longer teach.
Oh,
I did teach at Columbia, and I also taught at NYU and at Fordham, all in New York City. But I am actually now happily retired and living in the Hudson Valley, upstate
oh,
New York.
that's my
Uh,
old hood. I grew up in New York City.
I see. Well, I know New York City well, but I'm enjoying very much the fall weather we're having up here right now. And as I talk to you, I'm looking at leaves falling down off the trees and collecting on my lawn, which I have to rake when we're finished.
That's one little pain for a glorious time of year, weather-wise,
Well,
for the New
any,
York area.
anyway, now to get back to your question. Uh, what is interesting about your question is the fact that you're asking it. And you're asking it at a very special moment, a moment that essentially seems to promise that people in the region, as a result of this moment and Trump's plan, 20-step plan, you said 21. Was
Yeah,
there
21.
another?
I think it's 21 points.
There is one. So there is one more point added then since I last looked at it. In any case, there's this idea that we want things to be resolved peacefully and harmoniously so that everyone in the region and the rest of the world can live happily ever after. We've been at this moment a number of times before. We've been at this moment right after Camp David. We've been at this moment when Reagan administration managed to convince Yasser Arafat and the Palestinians to leave Lebanon in 1982-83 and move to Tunis, so as to put an end to the war between Israel and Lebanon. We've been at this moment when Bill
Oslo Accords,
Clinton,
of course.
the Oslo Accord, of course. Indeed, the Oslo Accord were supposed to be the icing on the cake. And then after the Oslo Accord, we had Bill Clinton turning himself into knots, trying to bring Yasser Arafat and Ehud Barak together at Camp David too. And that ended with the
Intifada.
The Intifada of the Al-Aqsa Intifada of 2000, September 2000. So, we were very close when Mahmoud Abbas came to Annapolis in 2008, or at least sent representatives to discuss the agreements that George W. Bush was trying to forge together between these four. So we've been there before. And why is this moment different? I don't think that it is going to be very different. As they often say, the devil is in the details of the agreement. I am skeptical. I used to say, and I'd quote JFK here, I used to say, I'm an optimist with no illusions. And in my years in academia, talking about this and discussing it and reading and writing about it, yes, we all wanted this thing to resolve in some fashion, and we would look at all the factors involved in the approach to the problem and hope that this would be the golden bullet. Or is it the silver bullet? I forget which bullet it is. In any case,
I'll take any medal.
Yeah, I think at this point we really have to see how the various aspects of the plan are implemented. Every one of those plans is likely to raise objections from either side, although I suspect more objections from the Palestinian side or the Hamas side, really, because it's Hamas that is involved at this particular point, as well as others, but not Palestinians. So we need to really see how the plan and its implementation evolve over the next few weeks, few months, or few years. To paraphrase Marco Rubio, who said it's going to take a long time for this thing to come about.
Of course. Yeah. I think I think you and I both would agree that, without illusions, the returning of the hostages is a magnificent and needed achievement that was facilitated by this plan.
Yes, very clearly a major dimension that has immense optical effects is the hostages. And I would also add in the same sentence, and the cessation of the destruction of Gaza.
Right, the bombing campaign.
And what that means for the population.
And the immediate flooding of humanitarian aid, which we anticipate.
Well, yes, but when you've been fasting for a long time, you have to be very careful how much you ingest at your first meal. This is
true. Very true.
I don't mean to make light of this, but I would have to point out that from some of the sources I have read, Gaza has never really lacked that much material for sustenance, both food and medicines and other critical items. Yes, the international media, mainstream media, and as well as some international organizations have highlighted the fact that there is starvation, there's war by starvation by Israel. I take this with a grain of salt. Okay, there's a lot of statistics indicating that, and I don't have them at my fingertip, but there are statistics indicating that there's a lot of stuff that has gone through into Gaza and distributed.
And
so
I've also
in any case, but the humanitarian aspect is critical. And once this is addressed, and what is interesting, of course, is that it has to be addressed initially. All of the other technocratic aspects of the plan including the formation of what do they call it? The Board of Peace.
Yes,
Yes, the
led
Board
by
of Peace.
chaired by President Trump, and I think his XO, if you will, to take a military term, would be Tony Blair,
Absolutely,
the
and he'll
Minister
be
of,
doing the heavy lifting. He'll be doing the heavy lifting and taking the blame for any setbacks.
Indeed.
But that's how it works. But those will be much more challenging to implement fully, at least incrementally and ultimately fully. But the humanitarian thing, the release of the hostages, the arrival of and solidly shown of humanitarian aid to Gaza also should be the priority. And I understand that the hostages have to be released, 72 hours from now, from when the Israelis sign on to the document.
Some live hostages were due to be released today. I don't
Uh-huh.
know if that has happened as we tape this broadcast, but it
Right.
seems that some live hostages will be coming home in very short order.
Have they, by the again, not having the document in front of me, perhaps you know, are there any parameters applied to how the hostages are released? Because in the past, Hamas has used the release of hostages as a major propaganda
As
efforts,
theater. Yep.
theater of the street, if you will. So, are there any parameters on how the hostages are to be released? Because this is important.
That's an excellent question that I've heard no one bring up, and because of that, I don't have the answer to that question. I guess we could both speculate on that,
Yeah.
but I hope that they tone down the theater of the hostage release and tone up the theater of peace having a chance to spread in Gaza.
Right. I'll go back to the first part of your statement because I kind of disagree with the second part. And the first part is, I'm sure you'll agree, especially you, with the visuals of this process are very, very important
Absolutely.
to the outcome, but also to international opinion and to how this thing is absorbed by both sides and by the international opinion. So the visuals are very important.
They're critical.
As to the second part of your question, again, it goes back to what I said a bit earlier, and that is, let's wait and see before we chant "Kumbaya" here. Okay, and
Agreed.
and see how it evolves. And this is really my concern, both in the medium and the longer term, is the implementation of the dicier aspects of this process, the disarmament of Hamas, for example. The fact that, and we can take these one at a time, the fact that they're not supposed to participate in the subsequent government the day after, for example. The role of the PA, the role of a multinational force made up mostly of Arab and Islamic countries' forces, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff here that has to
There are a
be
lot of
addressed.
steps. There
Yeah,
are a lot
yeah,
of landmines, if you
sure.
will, many of whom you have already mentioned. I guess let's go into a time machine, if you will, intellectually, and rewind to October 6th of 2 years ago, before, of course, the horrific genocidal attack on Israel by Hamas. It seemed to me that it was a strategic move by Hamas. It wasn't just that they have blood in their hearts, although they do, but it was a strategic move because if we recall at that time, the Abraham Accords, of course, signed on to the expansion of the peace between Israel and its neighbors, which I would argue started under Sadat and Begin in 1979, but continued to expand to include Jordan in I think the early 80s or late 80s, early 90s, and then to include the UAE and some other Gulf
Hmm.
states to actually recognize Israel, but not only recognize Israel's right to exist, but also to engage in commercial activity, trade, and really create an interdependence and integration of Israel into the larger Middle East. It is precisely at that time that some would argue, I don't know if you would, that the Palestinian issue was being kind of sidelined. We'll get to that later. We've got bigger fish to fry in that Israel is making peace with other nation states in the region, their neighbors. And then Hamas had that diabolical, evil, but I would argue strategically brilliant, horrific attack on the Israelis on October 7th. My Giving all that background, my question is, have we essentially gotten back to that pre October 7th attack moment in the region, minus of course the fact that Gaza is virtually the infrastructure of Gaza is virtually destroyed, tens of thousands of lives lost, and the fact that Israeli IDF soldiers have lost lives as well in this war. Have we essentially gotten back to that pre October 6th? I think it was 2023 period.
On October 6th, a slight correction, by the way, Niger. Jordan was not part of the Abraham Accord. Jordan had signed the peace treaty in 1995.
Right,
Israel.
right.
Following Egypt's treaty in 1978-79. The Abraham Accord entailed Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, the Sudan, which is a failed state, and Morocco. For your information, Morocco has been in bed with the Israelis for many, many, many years.
Yes, they've been a good friend of Israel. Yes.
More than that, they've acted as a facilitator between Israel and other parts of the Arab world that did not wish to appear to be dealing with Israel openly. This has been one of the problems, by the way, which Abraham Accord sought to resolve, is that the Arabs, at least the Arab states, politicians and political policymakers could deal with Israel openly, and they were doing it. The Arab street, that's another story. And further on this point of relations between Israel and some of its Arab neighbors, there had been relations before the Abraham Accord between Israel and some of the Gulfies. Commercially, yes, but more importantly, security. The Gulfies have been dealing with Israeli, including the Saudis, by the way, on security matters, mostly motivated by their apprehensions about Iran.
Sure.
And they viewed Israel as a reliable and powerful asset on their side, should it come to a confrontation to Iran. Okay. And they all, by the way, in private, agreed with Israelis' idea that, because they suffered the same consequences and the same threats, Islamic terrorism, which in the case of Israel was symbolized by Hamas, okay, and Hezbollah to the north, a client of Iran. So we're not really at October 6th. And by the way, October 6th, there was a peace, there was a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, which had been signed 2 years before in 21. There were tens of thousands of Gazans going into Israel to work and bring back shekels for their economy. You know, and yes, there have been criticism of that policy of Netanyahu to mow the grass. You know, the little wars between the wars. This was something that they were willing to live with. What essentially prompted Hamas to, and before I answer your question, what prompted Hamas to attack Israel on October 7th? I think there are a number of factors here. The regional strategic imperatives that led Hamas to do this was the fact that Israel and Saudi Arabia were on the cusp of establishing relations.
Yes.
And the Saudis, going back to World War II and Roosevelt and the Saudi king Ibn Saud, agreed that the Palestine issues would be resolved with the agreement of the Arabs and especially of the Saudi kingdom. And from then until today, the Saudis, well, while they've had relations with the Israelis, sub rosa, were considered after Nasser's passing, and aside from Khomeini, the ultimate defenders of Palestinian. In fact, the Saudis themselves hosted a number of attempts at bringing the various aspects of the Palestinian political spectrum together. Okay. And that never really, but so the possibility of a Saudi-Israeli rapprochement was anathema to Hamas. And frankly, after the Abraham Accord, the Palestinian issue was no longer on the front burner of the Arab world.
Right.
There's a new reality here. And that really troubled the Hamas especially, although the Palestinian Authority was in discussions with the Israelis, cooperation, security, what have you. Some of it worked, some of it didn't work. But for Hamas, they were completely sidelined. Yet they were sitting on Gaza and 2 million, a population of 2 million. And also with a charter that calls for the destruction of Israel.
That's right. That has not been removed.
No. And which they, by the way, believe in and apply and wish to apply, not because of political realism or because of calculations, but because of zealotry and fanaticism. And so these are important aspects. And they take advantage of the regional dynamics. And by the way, one of the regional dynamics that might have also encouraged Hamas was the disarray within Israel over the judicial reform issue that had started in 2006 in Israel, pitting large protests against the government of Netanyahu that wanted to alter the structure of the Supreme Court and curtail its powers. And I recall reading that even Hezbollah was essentially Hassan Nasrallah, their late leader, may he rest in peace, wherever the hell he is, saying that Israel is now on the ropes and vulnerable. And when you get the Israeli reserve pilots writing notes that they're not going to show up in case of something, because they don't like Netanyahu, what do you think the jackals around Israel were thinking? It was right for the taking. And Hamas started this attack thinking that the others would join in. The other non-state actors, also clients of Iran. And of course, they didn't. And so Hamas was left dealing with riding the tiger by themselves. And so that we're not at October 6th, we're October 10th, which is very different. And it's very different for many factors.